Hello, everybody. I think what happened was the Archons got us, but one of those things. I just asked Mark about, I think maybe it's because maybe the powers that be are looking down on us and not necessarily liking my question about asking an ex-Church of England vicar whether he's still a Christian. But let's go back to that question now. So, Mark, please continue.
Yeah, I've certainly had moments where I've thought perhaps I wasn't. I'll tell you why I still think I am. I'll come to that in a moment. I'm wary of the word. First of all, Christian, it's got so many connotations, everything from kind of Donald Trump and his lot to extreme forms of fundamentalism in various, isms.
It's hitting us again.
Is it? Oh,
yeah.
Gosh. Wonder what that is.
I'll get you guys can't hear it, can you?
No.
Okay, let's just continue. I'll bear with it.
All right. Yeah, so so Christian to me is a difficult word, and I normally qualify it with another term, like say progressive Christian or liberal Christian. Even those though are not perfect. But I think what I consider to be my kind of base is, and this might sound cheesy, but it is the man Jesus of Nazareth. And I think if you have a faith that is connected to him, whether you believe in the literal Son of God stuff or not, I think you can use the word Christian. I ebb and flow. I used to say actually the beauty of the Church of England was it's broad enough to let you drift a little and sort of grow, and then maybe find yourself outside of it for a while and then come back in. And I think Christianity is very much like that. I mean, at the heart of it is a very beautiful message, a very messy message, and one that I really believe, which is that it's incarnation. It's that all things have the divine within them, and this image that we're going to come to in a few weeks' time of the manger scene. It's anything but a sanitized Christmas card image. It's a homeless couple, refugees about to give birth in a really shitty stable full of animals, and it's a messy, muddled up, and yet this is the picture of deity and humanity joined together, and so it's a beautiful symbol. How can that have turned into something completely the opposite, really, of powerful people up on thrones looking down on, it's a very complex, it's a difficult question. I love being in the place that I am now, which is outside the officialdom of the church, but still able to have these connections with people, still able to feel that I'm a priest. And I'm a priest because I believe everybody is a priest, and I'm a magician because I believe everybody is a magician. And it's the magician and the priest in me is trying to awaken the magician and the priest in other people. A tree can be a priest. If a priest is some sort of mediator between deity and matter, then a tree can be a conductor for that, or a beautiful flower, or a sunset. And so, of course, people can be, and animals can be. We're all part of a. This is where perhaps I wouldn't last very long if I came back into the Church of England, because I just wouldn't be allowed to say that sort of stuff, or I would, but I'd be seen as a weirdo.
Well, I think it's interesting here coming in with Sarah, because I know, Sarah, you've started going back to church recently, haven't you? And you're finding it's quite intriguing you.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I've got quite high tolerance for being considered a weirdo. So I really love so much about church, but what I struggle with is exactly what you were talking about, Mark, this kind of like rigidness around talking around the validity of other faiths and beliefs. Yeah. And I will be having these kind of deep theological conversations sometimes, and you think, wow, we're really like talking, we're really engaging, and we're both independent individuals. And then there'll be almost this kind of advertising pitch that starts coming and becomes, at some point you're just going to have to say yes to Jesus. And I was like, I say yes to Jesus all the time. I love a bit of Jesus, but can I also be into Osiris and Isis and and trees and nature and love nature, and there's this sort of glamorization of suffering and sin in a way that I do also struggle with as well. This this kind of you can see why people go crazy with the church in a way as well, with the power of it, because it is so powerful. It's so powerful to get people together in prayer and to create this altered high state of consciousness. That's how the kind of superiority develops in this, like, we've got special access to this altered high state that no one else knows about or can achieve. But of course, people are achieving this all the time in a variety of different ways. So I love the idea of being able, because also the idea of sacred space I love as well. And I love the idea of, once a week going to some sacred space that isn't about, the church has a sort of commercial aspect to it in a lot of ways. I mean, I've been going to a church which is associated with the Alpha Course, and this Alpha Course thing, I had a friend who I also met in church, and it was both like, oh, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? And then she was saying, oh, they talked me into the Alpha Course eventually. And she was like, don't bother. It's really boring. You just watch loads of videos, and then you can't ever like agree to disagree. It is always just, this is the facts, and you either believe it or you don't. So yeah, I mean, it's an endlessly fascinating conversation to me. I wish,
well, we're both.
I love the idea of our nation having its own sort of religion, but I would love it if it was more kind of open, and that there was a bit more flexibility. But there's so much love, generosity, and warmth there, and they do so many amazing things for the community that in a way, the positives definitely seem to outweigh the negatives.
Well, this is it, isn't it? Which is how you harmonize the idea of Christianity and paganism. And I know both of you sit in both those camps. So, Mark, in terms of that, how do you harmonize paganism and Christianity?
The funny thing is I find it odd that people find it odd. I find it, and on both sides, and I find some in the pagan world to be incredibly eclectic. They can have gods of Hindu gods on their altars and Celtic, but you talk about Jesus or church, and suddenly the shutters go back. Now I understand why, and that's because Jesus and the church have been always seen to be exclusive. But I've never had an issue. And if you look back in the church's past, even some of the very well-known kind of figures like Francis of Assisi, who's still seen as a great saint in the Roman Catholic Church, and you can't get a more authoritarian church than that. And yet he wrote songs to Mother Moon, to Sister Moon and Brother Sun and the wind and the he called the birds his brothers. I mean, it was pagan. It was what we would all. If I started saying that in a church meeting when I was still a vicar, someone would probably say, "Oh, you sound very pagan." It comes from St. Francis of Assisi. So it's not just. I mean, it's all the way through. There's in some of the Jesus stories too. There's a real earthiness. I think the trouble is that the Christianity has sort of developed almost a split sort of self. It's the sacred and the profane, and it's kind of ended up with this idea that to keep yourself pure, you have to almost cocoon yourself within some sacred world, and that is precisely the opposite of what Christianity really meant, what Jesus originally meant. One of my last bishop before I left the Church of England, he used to say, "God cannot look upon darkness," and I thought, where the hell did you get that from? Because it's not from. Actually, it's not from, the whole point again of this story we're just about to, it's a God plunging herself in human mess and muddle and seeing the beauty of that. And the idea of the cross, and I don't believe the cross is a sacrifice to an angry God. It's a very powerful image of a God figure embracing the very darkest point of being human, throw the most at me, and still being able to kind of offer love within that context. And there was a medieval tradition called the harrowing of hell, which sounds awful, but it was the idea of Jesus sort of almost getting to the point of visiting the ones that we would see as totally without any spirit, and and bringing them in. So it's totally inclusive. I don't like some of that kind of language, but it's there in the in the tradition. And I think so. To me, going back to your question, there is no need to find it a problem. I mean, I always had one of the wonderful things about the Church of England was that in my training, they taught us to be, or they expected us to be very open to other faiths. They sent us on trips to Leicester to spend time with Hindus and Muslims. It was absolutely wonderful. And there's very little when you look at Hinduism, it's very similar to modern paganism. There are people within Hinduism who have very similar ideas of God to the pagans that I know. Some are polytheistic, hard polytheistic, which means literally separate gods. Some have more of a soft polytheism, so they believe that these are faces of the one true, or the one kind of spirit, the Brahman. And I know pagans who come to their understanding of God and Goddess that way. And that's what I believe. I believe that we see glimpses of God in all things and in all peoples and in all faiths. And, to me, there doesn't have to be an issue with it. And it's, it's frustrating because I just wish more people would get that when I live in Leominster now, which is the place where I used to be the vicar. And, I used to invite Tibetan Buddhists to come and do chanting in the church so that people could experience, the difference and the beauty of other faiths. So
I think one other thing I've noticed with church as well is this sort of inability to acknowledge and look at any of the evil that's been done in the name of Christianity in the past. It doesn't exist at all. I actually find that kind of scary because they're people that you think are really nice and you really get them, but there's this I was talking to one of them recently about all the children that they found the bodies of underneath all these churches in Canada, and they're like, I've never heard anything about that. Unthinkable that it's like this complete separation from reality. And I think that Christianity would do so well if it just said, yes, the power of this thing can corrupt people. We accept that. That's why you have to be really careful when you do start to, 'cause I think there's an element of suspending a certain disbelief as well, especially if you're brought up. I was brought up completely atheist. My mum and dad sent us to Sunday school, but just to get rid of us, they weren't at all in religion. And I was always told it was ridiculous, So when I meet a lot of people at church, they're unaware of the level of indoctrination that they've gone through since childhood. And, they do all these little kids groups and toddlers groups to get people in really young because the kids love dancing to Christian rock and all this sort of stuff. And, it does offer a lot to people, but I think that there needs to be a bit more transparency. And they shouldn't be afraid of facing their shadow, because I actually think that would open it up to a lot more people. Yeah,
absolutely right. And that's going back to that this idea of my bishop who said, God cannot look upon darkness. It creates this terrible sort of idea that to stay pure you have to not look at the darkness and the shadows and avoid it. And of course it creates a bigger one. And then it comes out in all of those areas. And, psychologically, it's pretty screwed up, in that sense. It projects it onto figures like the devil or other faiths or pagans. It does a lot of projection.
I think the problem probably is, in terms of theology has always quite fascinated me, and the concept of theophany and the concept of if God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipotent, how does he tolerate the existence of evil? And of course, this is why the Gnostics came up with their concept of the demiurge and the idea that there's a God behind God, and there's this good God, and the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh or Jehovah, was smiting people everywhere. And I've just come back from a tour of Jordan, and it's interesting there to see, because we went near to the site of Sodom and Gomorrah at the bottom of the Dead Sea. Wow. And it's extraordinary to see these places geographically that as a kid. and the walls of Jericho. We could see Jericho in the distance one time, and it's extraordinary. And I think you've obviously been very interested in these ideas and the challenges of Christian belief system. And your first book was actually called, The Gospel of Falling Down. And do you think there's really a good news in this failure? Do you think that there is something that can be positively taken from this?
Yeah. While I totally agree with what Sarah said at the beginning about there's too much emphasis on perhaps suffering and sin, I do feel that Christianity is very success orientated and very perfectionistic, and very kind of if you do the right things and if you're a good person, blah blah blah, which again creates the shadow, because you don't want to look at yourself in that regard. But I think, to me, the story, again going back to the figure of Jesus, it's the precise opposite of that. It's fine. The people that he always struggled with were the perfectionists. The people that he couldn't almost teach were the ones who thought that they had all the answers, and were the religious terms, the good people. They were the ones who went to the temple, went to the synagogue, went to the churches, went to, the people that seemed to be ready for his very radical message were those at the bottom of the pile, and those who'd made a mess of their lives, and those who'd been, for whatever reason, marginalized. And I see this within myself. I wrote that book because I used to make one cock up after another in the church, and I have been at rock bottom, in many different ways, and I don't like that place, and I don't encourage anybody to go there intentionally. But we all, from time to time, we break, we shatter, we crack, and in that brokenness is the potential, I think, to see the light in a way that we often don't when we're at the top of the ladder, because then it's all about us. We're not open. We're like that Zen story about the teapot or the teacup, when the teachers, the students rabbiting on about how clever he is, and the students pouring more and more tea in the cup until it's overflowing, and the student says, why are you doing that? He says, well, look, you're like this teapot. You're just so full of yourself. You're not open. And that's, I think it's about openness, and brokenness is a place, is the place. I've certainly experienced this myself, where if you stay with it, and if you're kind of brave enough to look into those cracks, you can find beautiful light. And it's a metaphor and a universal archetype as well. It's in so many stories. The person who comes back after a complete prodigal son is a classic of Jesus. The guy who makes a complete and utter mess of his life, totally deserved. He deserved to end up in that mess, but he came back to pure grace, and was welcomed by these wide open arms of his father. That's a metaphor for coming back home in your brokenness. And so I'm not in any way suggesting that suffering is a good thing, or that even brokenness is a good thing, but it's just a natural human thing. And if we just allowed ourselves, I think, and it's where we find that voice. I used to do an exercise. I used to run retreats called The Gospel of Falling Down, and one of the things I used to do was to try to get people to almost, it's a little bit manufactured this, but to go into a meditation where they imagine or relive a certain point in their life which is broken, and then to write a letter from God to themselves. And it's not from God, it's from their higher self, and it usually blows their minds because of what actually they teach themselves. And so
I mean, I really like that idea of your higher self, which I'd argue, in my writings, in my latest book, I'm coming up with a concept that I call the Godemon, which is I say that, there's the Eidolon, which is living within the simulation. Then there's the daemon, which is your higher self. Then beyond that is what I call the Uber daemon, which is the Jungian collective unconscious of humanity. Then above that, I have a concept I call the Godemon, which is effectively like the Or Ein Sof that you have within Vedanta, within Kabbalah and Brahman.
Right.
And the idea, it's kind of God perceiving itself through humanity. It's God living within its own soap opera. It's embodying itself. And in this, I'm reminded of Philip K. Dick's book, The Divine Invasion, where you have a young boy called Manny, who in fact is God, who's re-embodied himself into the universe. And again, it comes back to a phrase I use a lot, the Bill Hicks phrase of the idea of we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. And of course, every religious belief system and every esoteric form of religious belief system, from Sufism, as I say, to Kabbalah, they all have the same idea: find the God within. You know, find who that spark of the pleroma that's inside you, you know, so using Gnostic terms. And I think that idea, you're using the gospel of falling down, I think that's a wonderful idea. I love that, the idea of your higher self writing a letter to yourself about the pain you've gone through, because we've all been there. And one of the most wonderful things I find about your work, and again, if anybody's watching this or anybody's watching the recordings, do check out Mark's work and Mark's magic tricks and everything, because Mark does something quite extraordinary. He uses magic and illusion within his ministry. And could you tell us a little bit of how that started, how you had this parallel career of a member of the Magic Circle and a Church of England vicar as well?
Yeah, it goes back to those very early days when I was into all sorts of things as a young lad. I was into Arthur C. Clarke, you know, the magazines, The Unexplained, Men in Black, and all that kind of stuff, UFOs. And alongside that, I was also very interested in magic as illusion. And for some reason, there's some people who are magic illusionists. They're very, very atheistic and very skeptical. So they wouldn't ever be looking at books on, you know, unexplained, because they think that their gift is to explain the unexplained because it's all illusion to them. I'm not in that camp at all. I think if you go back far enough, magic as in illusion, sleight of hand, came out of the other form of magic. And if you go back to the ancient shamans of almost every, from Siberia to Native American, there's a wonderful book by a guy called Eugene Berger and Robert Neal called Magic and Meaning, and they've studied this. And in the ancient mythologies of these sort of tribal religious traditions, that there's evidence that they used a lot of. There's one illusion called the egg bag, which is, you might have seen a magician pulls eggs out of a bag and it's empty, and that goes back to a Native American illusion which was called a snake bag, and they used to use it. There was a snake in it, but it didn't look like it, and they would pull it out, and it would be a symbol of I think this was a symbol of something negative, that they would sort of, there would be some sort of ritual. They would pull this snake out, and I think it would happen in reverse. It would vanish it or something. But it was basically an illusion that was used by the shaman and then passed down to other shamans. But the faithful, the people would think of it as real magic. There's a modern form of that in the Far East called psychic surgery, which I think is clearly manipulated. It's clearly a sleight of hand, but it actually works because people see things removed from their bodies, and some of them seem to get better. And you know, it's a strange sort of thing, and it's where magic as illusion taps into the other form of magic. So going back to the story, I kind of when I became, first of all, a Pentecostal Christian, that's how I got into the Christian tradition. I didn't have to, but I was pretty much encouraged to sever all my links with anything sort of magical or martial arts, and anything that wasn't, you know, anything that was from the East was seen as dodgy. Anything magical was seen as very dangerous. So for a few years, I put a lid on it. But then when I became an Anglican, I needed something. I felt that rather than to save me becoming one of these very parsonical, the Lord be with you, all sort of characters, you know, I thought I need a hobby that's not churchy. So I thought, magic, you know, it's something I've always been interested in. And so when I left theological college, I was by then a member of the Magic Circle and used it a lot originally in school assemblies as object lessons, and to talk about Easter by breaking something and then making it come back together again, those sort of things. But as time went on, I use it less in that way now and more as an encourager of synchronicity, because I think when you're in that kind of alert state or that enchanted state, and it might be that you've seen a sunset or you've seen something beautiful or listened to a beautiful piece of music, when you're in that open state of being, I think you can spot the synchronicities that are all around us much easier. And I've seen this in some of the mind reading illusions that I used to do on stage. People would come up to me after and say, I know that was a trick, but you won't believe what just happened. And they tell me something and it blows my mind. And it's sort of, I do find that incredibly exciting. Some people in the kind of magical with a K world do find it difficult to see my magic as relevant, because they see it almost as derogatory, and saying that therefore magic must be a con. It's not that at all. To me, it's no more than Father Christmas stories are a con. They're a beautiful, enchanted way of waking up children or bringing children into the mystery of Christmas. Stories of Father Christmas. They're not a con at all. And in the same way, the mind reading style magic or any form of magic, I think is a beautiful art form. When I used to go to Blackpool and watch the big illusions, used to go once a year at a conference, and when you see someone flying to a piece of music through on the stage and over your heads, it's like a real life Peter Pan, and you can't but be totally awestruck by it, and because it taps into those universal archetypes and the fact that we would all love to fly, and maybe we do in our dreams, that sort of thing. So long-winded answer that, sorry.
No, not at all. I mean, the whole idea of magic, is it's illusion, and it's to do with diversion of attention and everything else as well. But it's very much a psychological thing. And it's very much, as you say, it's almost opening you up to the magical. The idea, is my background, and when I was at university, we were studying the sociology of religion and how religions themselves work on the question of illusion. And I think that the way you bring the two together is extraordinary, because you bring the magical in, and that there are many friends of mine who are magicians. I mean, my mother was a magician's assistant for many years. Yeah. And she would never ever divulge the things she was involved in, because she said, she was the lady that got cut in two and everything else. In fact, she was the original. There was Debbie McGee. Well, my mother was called Frances McGee, and she always argues she was the original Debbie McGee, but she had the wrong name. But she'd never tell me of how the tricks worked. And she said, but sometimes we really felt that sometimes there was a magical presence that seemed to take over. And she said sometimes the magic became the magic. And I know that you've got one or two ideas about showing us a couple of things now, which I'm really excited to move on to.
Just one thing to point out: since COVID, I haven't done any, apart from I did a few tricks last night, but I haven't done any live magic. I used to do big shows, and so some of this may go wrong, but it doesn't matter. And also it's the first time doing it over Zoom, so I'm aware that people might, that you can't see everything, and hopefully let's just try it. I know that you've both got a pack of cards, regular pack of playing cards. I've got some here as well. In a moment, I'm going to put a blindfold on myself, because it's the only thing I can do to try to convince people that I can't see what's going on. Because I could, of course, have another screen there, showing me everything that you see. I haven't, but people might think I have. This is something I used to do to try to bring in the idea of synchronicity. So if you could just open the cards that you've both got, open the boxes, just regular deck cards, yeah, lovely, and you just be mixing them up. In a moment, I'm going to have to ask you, because I'm going to have a blindfold. I want you to be able to see. Can you see these cards?
Yes, Sarah, can you see them as well?
If I do that, and you can see that I'm going to go very slowly in a moment, and I'll cut them a few times. In fact, do you want to just say cut whenever?
Cut.
Yeah.
Sarah, do you want to join?
Sarah?
Cut.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So now, what I'm going to do is this is what I used to use on. Oh, it's going to be difficult with my headphones on. But, okay, it's totally steel. It's solid steel, and I also have somewhere. Can I still find the cards? A big. This is going to be very interesting with the headphones on as well.
This is live, folks. This is the real deal.
Okay, so I got to find those. I've got a bit of arthritis. Right. What I want you to do now, I'll get you both to do. First of all, can you see? Is that about the right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I go very slowly, first of all, Anthony, just say stop.
Stop.
Yeah, and then Sarah, just say stop.
Stop.
Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to do, I'm going to show you the top card. Can you see that? Don't say what it is, but memorize it. Put those out of the way, and take all this. Right, cards are over there. So hopefully people will be convinced that I haven't seen that. So I want you both now to hold the cards up that you're holding. That's it. And then, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So if you cut them anywhere you like in the middle, and then show me the card that's there. Yeah. Lovely. Okay. So that's a queen of clubs. They're French cards, aren't they? Now, clubs in tarot is wands, which is a fire element. So I would assume from that you're a fire sign.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
What are you? What are you?
Aries.
Okay. So fire sign, and also the queen is made up. It's numerically numbered 2 and 1. It's a 12. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's your birthday, isn't it? It's 12.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Wait. Okay. So that's good. And so that is that's a perfect for you. And also, Sarah, can you just show me, do the same, please? I can't quite see. You have to say something. So what? Can you read it out, please? Because I can't see it. It's at the back.
7 of spades.
7 of spades. Okay. So spades is associated with the sword suit, which is usually seen as air, but I don't see you as an air person. You're more water, because I can see the color in you. So are you Scorpio or Cancer?
Cancer.
Right. Okay. 7. This is going to tell me something. This is a difficult one. I think I'm going to choose one of your cards to help me find the card that you both saw. I'm going to go with Anthony's, which was a 12, which is numerically 12. So it's either numerically 12, a 1, which is an ace, or a 2 of clubs, your card. Now, could just tell me your date of birth, please, Sarah?
22nd of June.
That's enough. 22. So it's a 2. It was the 2 of clubs. Is that correct?
It was.
Yeah. Now, the weird thing is, do you remember I sent you an email yesterday?
Yes.
Can you open it now?
Yes.
You haven't opened it, have you?
No, I haven't.
And let's see what that says.
So I've got it on my phone.
This is hopefully the synchronicity.
Okay, so right. This is not to be opened until tomorrow.
Okay, so if you can open that.
Okay. Oh my word.
What does it say?
It says, I have a feeling this card relates to you, Tony, and it's the 2 of clubs.
There we go. So
wow.
Do you want one with do you want one with books before Sarah goes?
Oh yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. So now it's another thing to do with synchronicity. I know that Anthony's got a book of his there, and I've got my wizard book here. So what I'm going to do, and we always felt that there was a bit of a connection between these two books. So I'll do this with Sarah, both of you, because it might be difficult to see. If I flick like that, and it doesn't matter if I see this, if I flick like that, can you just say stop whenever you like?
Stop.
There?
Yeah.
So can you see that number of that page?
Yeah. Do you just lift it up slightly?
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Okay. So can you turn to that page in your book?
And I couldn't see what the page was.
Doesn't matter. It's okay. We can say, what was it, Anthony? What was the page?
92.
Okay. Can you turn to that page in the book that you've got as well, Sarah? This is really interesting just to see if there's... So, Anthony, on your book, if you put that page in front of you...
Yeah.
And I know that in your books, you like to italicize big blocks, but also independent words within... He's smiling already. So the first word or words that you see, don't say what they are, but on that page, just keep those in your mind. Yep. So the first words that you see, keep those in. And then, Sarah, on that page in your book, could you just read any sentence that strikes you as interesting?
A few seedling pines were growing up there too, and I knew that when a few more years came...
That's enough. A few seedlings were growing up their pine too. Yeah, you said the word two.
Yeah.
That's the word that's come to me. Two, second sight, seeing things happening again. Deja vu.
Yes.
That's your word.
That's my word.
Deja vu. Yeah, there we go. So there's a link between those.
I think out of all of this, I'm enjoying Anthony's incredulous face most.
Let me just, there was something else that I sent you on, I think it was on Messenger. It was a picture of my old-fashioned phone.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, I sent you that just because you could verify that I'm not, again, being too manipulative here, but I've got a piece of paper. So if you were, just as a matter of interest, on these old phones, you could, when you did a text or when you press the buttons, you could have a number or a couple of letters. So deja vu, what number would you need to press for D? So 3. You can check this afterwards.
Okay.
So and D E, that's 2 3s. J is 5. Deja A is 2, and then V and you are both 8. Now earlier on, Anthony came up with a random number that's right behind me on my wall, and I think you might find it. So
that is extraordinary.
It's fun.
Wow,
it's fun.
Absolutely.
There's really so much you can do with this stuff, and it really does relate to the sort of spiritual world and the psychological world. There's something else that, can I just show you one more, just because
please.
I've got another deck of cards here, which I'm not going to open for a moment. Now, have you got so your name, Anthony, has it got a TH?
It has, yes.
So you can spell Anthony 2 different ways. So one would be 8 letters, one would be 7 letters, but you're Tony, which is 4 letters. There's another word so Philip is another word, for example, you could spell with 2 L's. So it's got this, it's going to be 8 letters, 7 letters, or 4. So we're going to go with Philip because it's slightly like your name. So I want you to think of someone called Philip. It can be a real person or an imaginary person. Have you got someone in your mind?
Yes.
Just call him Phil. I want you to create a card for Phil. Now, to help you do that, you'll notice that earlier on I said that fire people are clubs or wands in tarot. So Phil, it doesn't matter if you don't know his date of birth, but if you think of him as a fiery sort of person, passionate, he would be a club. If you think of him as a very romantic, loving sort of person, he'd obviously be a heart. If he's earthy and grounded, he'd be a diamond. And if he's very intellectual and academic, he'd be a spade. And they relate to the 4 elements as well: earth, air, fire, water. Numerically, he could be a king or a jack, or he could be any of the numbers. Could be king, jack, queen. Could be any of the numbers. Is there a number that you can associate with him? This is harder to get, but just think of a number or a suit or a court card.
Okay.
Don't say what it is.
Okay.
But yeah. So you've got a suit and a value.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So, just going to show you this, because these cards, by the way, they're all named. So we've got Jake. I'll have to stand up. Jake, Paul, Mona, Vic, Ken, Len, Rick, Sam, Trev, Ruth, Dave, Don, Jean, Rose, Buck, Sven. All sorts of names, male and female, all the way through. Bud, Alec, Lisa, Jill, Jane. So what was the card that you were thinking of for Phil?
It was clubs and the ace.
Ace of clubs. Okay, let's just find the ace of clubs. Oh, there we go. Bill. So it's that you see I like, because it then, if you do that within, there's a bit of fun within something like a retreat, that you can then start talking about personality types and Jungian psychology. And
well, what I thought was interesting there as well was we now have a synchronicity, because as you probably are not aware, I wrote a biography of Philip K. Dick, the science fiction author.
Right,
and when you were flicking through, and if people want to rule back on that, one of the cards was called Dick. And I was waiting for Dick. I was waiting for that to happen. Really? And lo and behold, you flick through and there was Philip and then Dick.
Amazing.
And I thought, whoa, now is this just attention bias? Is it confirmation bias? Or is there something more in terms of synchronicities here? I mean, I do find it. Sadly, Sarah's had to go because she's about to do another event. But your opinions on this, do you find that when you do these magic tricks that something more happens, like an almost kind of an egregorial happening when you get into the zone?
And I'm totally honest. Magicians aren't honest, because they say there's a coin in the hand when there isn't. But I'm honest in the sense that everything that I've done, you know, is illusion, except that I always leave the 1% for. And I used to say this on stage, for genuine magic to occur, and I'm totally not in control of. And I've had so many. I said earlier on, so many instances where people, you know, came up to me afterwards to say, you would not believe, and they feel, you know, totally warmed by the experience, because something's happened, and things that are, you know, for example, there was one occasion where I did something with numbers and did something with I think it was a 4-digit number, and the person was thinking about, I think it was a dog who'd just died. I'm pretty sure it's called Jack, and it wasn't part of the trick, but for some reason it came up and it spelt Jack, the 4, and I'm trying to remember now. It was really mind blowing, but I've forgotten the actual the sort of the punchline of that. But it was beautiful, because she had tears in her eyes. She came up to me afterwards and said it was as if he was there, you know. And it's lovely, and it might just be a coincidence, but and it doesn't matter to me whether it is, but they certainly seem to happen more when people are in that kind of expectant, open state. You know, like yesterday with those cards, you know, that was manipulated, but what happened afterwards was totally magical, because I don't know whether they'd ever talked about, you know, they were engaged, but you know, they decided then I was going to be their wedding celebrant. And it's just lovely, you know. I find it really touching and special.
Well, to me, it's almost, you know, the idea, again, you probably haven't read my book, The Hidden Universe, but I come up with a concept I call the egregorial, which is that, you know, you look into quantum physics and you look into the relationship between anticipation and observer effects, and things coming into reality. You know, subatomic particles are a wave until you observe them, then they become a point particle in a location in time and space. And I just wonder that when you get into that kind of magical thinking, when you move out of the mundane into what Henri Corbin, the French philosopher, would call the mundus imaginalis, you start to create something else that is greater than ourselves, that is being created by us collectively. And I sometimes feel that when you're engaged in a kind of a magical trick, there's a kind of symbiotic relationship between the illusionist and the magician and the audience. And it's almost like, you know, going back to religious beliefs, it's almost like the guru, it's almost like the prophet, the way that they can engender enthusiasm, literally in the religious term of enthusiasm, you know, the out of body feeling. And I think, you know, there was something then that happened then, which you then open yourself up to astonishment, don't you? And wonderment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is what you created then.
Yeah. And it's the beautiful thing to me about mind magic is that the magician is the person who's in the audience. You know, again, I used to say this quite almost every time I perform. I'm not the magician here. You know, I'm enabling all of you to be the magicians, and it's, again, it sounds like, oh yeah, come on, but it's true. You know, we are all makers of magic, and we can all do wonderful things. We can all use our imagination and create things, and I want to use my magic to encourage people to find their magic. Same as I said about priesthood. You know, it's not my possession. It's not something I possess. It's something that we all are. And you know, the symbol of the magician is it's an archetype that you know, Gandalf, Merlin, you know, all of these figures, and I think there's one of them in all of us. You know, that's what that book was about, really. The Wizard's Gift. You know, there's a Gandalf in all of us. Yeah, so it's interesting stuff, and I'll probably never really work out what's going on. I'm wary of. There are some things I'm wary of. I'm wary of the type of magic, you know, where people claim things that are not true of themselves, and I think there's a lot of that. And there's actually a body within the magic circle that looks into that, because it's very cautious of, you know, there is a fraudulent aspect to that, and I think there are loads of very gifted and talented people out there who do wonderful things, but there are also people who do make a lot of money out of conning others, you know, in the church world and in the sort of psychic world.
I think this is the perfect moment, because I think what I'd like to do here, I'd like to have this discussion and interview as a two-parter.
Yeah,
because what I'd like to do, I think we've just scratched the surface, and what I'd like to do is to say, okay, fine, we'll because we've done our hour, but what I'd like to do is to, if you're available sometime next week, maybe we could revisit and have a longer discussion, because I think what's happening here is we're running out of time, and I feel that we've got what you're touching upon there, I think, is of profound importance, both, I would imagine, to the audience, but also to me personally, because this whole thing of the interface between anticipation and what is reality and isn't is profoundly important. So what I'd like to do is to say that we'll call it, if you can now let people know how they can contact you, and then I will announce in the next couple of days, we can agree what day next week we'll revisit, and we'll do a longer time period. Yeah, because I think we're just scratching the surface, and I may invite 2 or 3 other people to be involved, because I think we are really getting into something so important here.
Lovely. Very
happy. Can't let it go.
I have got a weekdays, and then next week I've got, it's one of those weeks I've got a lot of funerals on, sadly, because I had a few weeks off, and they've sort of, so it might be perhaps a little bit longer than a week, if that's okay.
Okay, no, that's fine. We'll agree that, and we'll announce it everywhere and say we're revisiting this. It will give people the opportunity to see this. And see what we've already created here in terms of that. And I am sure that the interest will be great once this gets out there and goes out, because Mark, that was extraordinary. I am still, my head is spinning. My head is absolutely spinning. And I know it was a trick, but you can actually see how that can be manipulated to draw people in to something. And it is one of my big issues at the moment is the amount of charlatans that are out there, the amount of snake oil salesmen that are manipulating people and making a lot of money. And I feel we need to do something about that. Because it discredits serious research into the occult and everything else as well. So if people want to contact you, want to check out your website and everything else, can you let me know? Let me know.
My website is called marktownsendministry.co.uk. It does come across as very much a celebrant website, because that's what it is. That's how I make a living. So it has got a contact page, and I'm very happy to talk to people and give other details. By the way, I didn't manipulate you choosing your own birth card. You had total control over that.
Yes.
12th, and it was an Aries sign. So
that was the most extraordinary. And I knew where, as soon as you said, I knew where it was going, and I thought, no, this is just so bizarre, just so mind-numbingly bizarre, but wonderful.
Brilliant.
Okay,
Great.
Mark, thank
Lovely.
you for that. And thanks again to Sarah, who had to go off to do something else. But we will be in contact. I'll be in contact with you next couple of days, and we'll arrange something live in maybe the week after next. That'll be really wonderful.
Cheers.
Thank you, Mark. That was absolutely magnificent. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, Anthony.